George Brizan, who unfortunately passed away on Saturday after a long battle with diabetes. So joining me now is Mr. Anthony Boatswain. How are you doing? Good morning.
Pretty good. How are you?
Good to see you.
Good, very good. Very good.
All right. Where were you when you first heard the news, and what was your reaction?
As a matter of fact, I got the news of George Brizan's passing on the George Grant program. I heard of it.
Okay.
And apparently he died this Saturday evening, and I heard the Sunday. So apparently sometime had passed before I got to what it. I was a bit taken aback because although I knew George was suffering from diabetes for some time, I wasn't aware that his condition had deteriorated to the extent that he was at that stage. But I think God knows best. He has made peace with his soul.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your relationship with him.
Well, my relationship with George Brizan goes way back to 1979-80, when we both gave private or extra lessons to A-level students, economic students at the GBSS. I'd recently returned from studies in Canada and the United States, and George Brizan was working in Ministry of Education. He was also, I think, a tutor at the IFE, which was the forerunner to the National College. And at that time, students were doing what they call the A-level examinations. At that time, we had the GC O-level and GC A-level exams, and he was really focusing on A-level economic students. And having returned and students wanted some help, he asked me to join him in giving those extra lessons on Saturday. And we did that free of cost at the GBSS for some time. Subsequent to that, our relationship grew when, after the demise of the revolution, a few of us who were looking for a political messiah, someone to lead us politically, approached George Brizan to form a new political organization. And indeed, we formed a party known as the National Democratic Party. And George Brizan was elected head. Well, I would say at the time maybe appointed, because we did not go through a convention. He was appointed head of the party. At that time, there were three political parties in existence together with the GULP. You had the GDM, Grenada Democratic Movement. I think Dr. Mitchell was a member of that party, so too was Francis Alexis. Then you had the NDP, which Brizan was the leader, and then you had the GNP of Robert Blaze, and then you had the GULP, which was a long-standing party. Subsequent to the formation of these three parties that emerged out of the demise of the revolution, they came together to form the new National Party. And therefore, Brizan, well, I'll say that he was not the politically ambitious person. George Brizan was never that person who was politically ambitious. So we really had to push him to take over the leadership. And therefore, when they formed that coalition of the three parties, we were not surprised that George was not considered for leader, a leader. I mean, Robert Blaze, being the old stalwart, became leader of the new National Party. They contested the 1985 general elections, and that's when the NNP won 14 of the 15 seats in Parliament. Then a series of events took place afterwards where the NNP disintegrated into three parties again. You had the TNP, then you had the NNP, mainstream NNP, of which Dr. Mitchell remained the political leader, took over from Robert Blaze, and then you had the National Democratic Congress, the NDC, of which Brizan became leader again. In 1989, again, our relationship, between 1983 and 1989, my relationship with George Brizan, continued to grow. By then, I was also involved in the private sector, and we continued working closely together. And in 1989, prior to the convention of the NDC and the general election of 1990, I was asked by Brizan to assist them in the preparation of the party's manifesto, which I did. In the 1990 election, the NDC won 7 of the 15 seats, although they did not win a majority, but at least, outright, but they had the majority seats in the parliament, and therefore they formed the government with the assistance of someone crossing over from the GOLP. Then again, I was asked by Brizan to join him in the Ministry of Finance as the chief economic planner. And during that time, 1991 to 1994, I worked in the Ministry of Finance as the chief economic planner, where I prepared the national development plan for the NDC administration, which was finally adopted as the plan for the way forward for the country. But in 1992, Grenada became uncreditworthy, was unable to meet its international commitments to lending agencies. And therefore, the country had a choice of either going to the IMF for a bailout. But in those days, going to the IMF was something that most countries feared, because the IMF programs are usually very oppressive programs, socially oppressive. And therefore, Brizan, after consultation with his colleagues in the region and discussing with his colleagues here, decided that he would not go the route of the IMF, and he will formulate his own homegrown structural adjustment program. And he did, with the assistance of some good technical expertise in the Ministry of Finance at the time. The program was supported by the IMF, although it was not an IMF program, it was supported by the IMF. And relatively speaking, I will say that that program was successful to the extent that Grenada was able to restore its creditworthiness, yes, and therefore was able to access external funding once again. But politically, one would say that the program did not succeed to the extent that there was not enough buy-in to the program by the general public. They were not aware of some of the difficult measures that the program contained. For example, the introduction of a levy known as the debt service levy, which most people objected to. And in my opinion, I believe if the program was sold to the public in a way that they could understand, right, some of the adversities, maybe the party would have fared better in the election. But I think that was missing, in addition to the fact that you had a new emerging young vibrant leader in Dr. Mitchell leading the NNP, and therefore it was difficult for the NDC to win that election in 1995. Subsequent to that, in 1999, the new National Party again contested the election with a coalition of the end of the National Democratic Congress, the GOLP, and another party, where the NNP won all of the 15 seats. Brizan was leader of the party at the time. He lost his seat, unfortunately, in the parliament. And being a patriot that he was, being someone who was so committed to the development of his country, he accepted a post offered to him by Dr. Mitchell to be a consultant. And that was very unique, because hardly you will find an ex-prime minister accepting the post as a technocrat or as a consultant with another government, that he was opposed to. But it showed two things: that Brizan was a very humble guy, and it shows that Dr. Mitchell was very magnanimous, in the sense that you offer your adversary such a important post in your administration. And that was really the history of George Brizan. And as you know, he was a diabetic for almost 40 years. And he continued to give service, continued to help the government by giving advice from his home, until things got worse, and ultimately he passed away. But his legacy will live on. As I said, he was a man who was committed to his country. He was a man who was dedicated to service. He was a very versatile person. George Brizan was a historian. He was a prolific writer. He wrote many books or many essays on Grenada. He was an economist, as I said, and he was a politician. And most important of all, he was a good family man. So I will say that in George Brizan, you had all of the good elements of a true patriot. And I believe when the final history of Grenada is written and we construct a register of our national heroes, George Brizan will be among the top of our national heroes. And may his soul rest in peace.
What was the biggest impact that he had on you?
The biggest impact George had on me was that his penchant for discipline. George was a disciplinarian. You could not be a slacker around George Brizan. If you had work to do, you had to do it right. You had to make sure it was right. You had to be punctual with him. And those are qualities that I got to realize serve you well. Not only in your job, but in your daily life. That your discipline ought to be a key factor. And maybe George, being a teacher for so long, even when he was in the ministry, he looked at the workers as his students, and maybe the way he spoke to them, really most people felt, well, hey, this man think he's a teacher, or what, but that was to redound to the benefit of all who really he worked with. And I believe that legacy of being a disciplinarian, a strict disciplinarian, is something that we'll all remember him for. And it's something I would say that is lacking in the government service today. People come to work when they want, they leave when they want. You couldn't do that with George Brizan. He will call you and say, listen, you have to be there for 8 o'clock, be there for it. And I believe that is something that we all benefited from.
Okay. So that's his greatest legacy, discipline?
This discipline, being that disciplinarian. But as I said, in terms of its economic impact, taking Grenada into this homegrown structural adjustment program, I think he will be long remembered for. Because at that time, very few countries in the region or even in the world would have dared to embark on such a program. It was, if you had problem at the time, you had fiscal imbalance or balance of payment problem, you go to the IMF for help, and they will impose a program. And those programs, as I said, were very onerous in terms of its social impact. And being able to take a country successfully on your own homegrown program, I think that will be his greatest legacy. In addition, George Brizan, being an economist and someone who loved agriculture, was very much concerned about Grenada exporting all of its produce in a raw state, the nutmeg, for example. He was very instrumental in having Grenada get involved in what they call the secondary processing of the nutmeg, because he always said that you have to get the value added, and in so doing, he was very instrumental in having a nutmeg processing plant established in the St. Patrick area, where they extracted the oil from the nutmeg. But he was not satisfied with that stage. I think he wanted to go into tertiary processing as well to extract the other ingredients from the nutmeg, so at least he could get greater value added. And I believe that in the latter part of his years, he was a bit disappointed that that stage did not materialize. I recall Brizan making a number of calls to the Ministry of Finance, to the present administration, asking them to work on that project, try to get, the extraction of oil raisins, and he called some nice fancy name, Australian, things like that, which I really not too familiar with. But, he was talking about the end product from the nutmeg, which he felt that we could do here. But unfortunately, that did not happen, and I believe that he was a bit disappointed that we did not move aggressively enough into the tertiary processing of the nutmeg.
What did he envision for Grenada? How did he think that we could get out of this? Was it the nutmeg, that tertiary parts of the nutmeg?
That to me was one of his key, that to me was one of his main vision, that Grenada could do well if we could go into the tertiary processing of nutmeg. As a matter of fact, he wrote a book, Nutmeg, Grenada's Black Gold. and he saw the nutmeg as the key to Grenada's future development. He saw the possibility of Grenada making millions of dollars if we could only extract those products from the nutmeg and market them, instead of selling the nutmeg, as we call it, in the crocus bag, where the foreign countries reap all the benefits from the value added, and Grenada really not doing much. So his vision was that we should go into Grenada could be. Nutmeg was unique, really, because apart from Indonesia, Grenada was the largest producer of nutmeg. And he felt that if we could go into that aspect of the nutmeg, Grenada could have been a very rich country. And even today, I believe that if we do that, we could really gain more benefit. And something we should credit Brizan for also is that Indonesia, although being the number one producer of the nutmeg at the time, there were many different marketing agents in Indonesia, and because of that they were able to keep the prices kind of relatively low. He was able to work with the Indonesian cartel to get them to form an association with Grenada, almost a monopoly for the nutmeg, and as a result of that, the price of nutmeg became very high, and we reaped some significant benefits. At a time when nutmeg price was very high and farmers benefited significantly, but unfortunately that cartel arrangement did not last long, and the prices fell down again, and we did not get as much benefit. And that is why he was saying that let us go into the secondary and tertiary processing of the nutmeg. Also, George Brizan was chairman of the ACP Council of Ministers, the African, Caribbean and Pacific grouping that had this relationship with the European Union, or the EEC at the time. And during his tenure as chairman of the ACP Council of Ministers, he was able to work closely with his counterparts in the EU, and to get them to fund a number of projects in Grenada. As a matter of fact, during Brizan's tenure, Grenada was ranked number one for the implementation of projects, because Brizan again was, his vision was that, hey, once you have an idea, let us transform that idea into reality. Let us, develop a project. Mm-hmm. And he was very good at formulating projects, identifying project ideas and formulating the project. And because of that, he was able to get a number of projects initiated in Grenada. And Grenada was ranked number one and received accolades because of Brizan's leadership in the ministry at the time in so doing.
How would he like to be remembered?
Brizan will be one. Brizan was not somebody who was, as I said, desperate for power. He was not the kind of consummate politician, the kind of aggressive politician. There are times he had to be pushed. Brizan would be best remembered, and I think he will like to be remembered as someone who loved his country, wanted to make a contribution to the development of his country, wanted to develop the human capital, because, as I said, being an educator for many years, there are a number of Grenadians who hold very high degrees, doctorates, who were students of Brizan, and therefore I think he will like to be remembered as someone who was concerned about his country, a patriot, someone who loved working with people, and not so much as a politician. I don't think Brizan will like to be remembered as a politician, because when he gave up the leadership of his party, many people felt that that was not the right thing to do. When he again took his party into that coalition, people felt that if he had gone alone, his party would have done well, because opinion poll taken at the time showed that his party was the number one party in Grenada at the time, but yet he gave up because he felt that the greater good was to form a coalition of the other two parties, and to me, his thing was not leadership or power, but to serve the country, and it did not matter in what capacity he served. And as I said, the ultimate demonstration of his love for country and his lack of obsession with power was when he accepted that position as a consultant with the NNP government after he lost the election and being a prime minister. So, love of country, I think, if an epithet is to be written on Brizan, I would think would be love of country.
Love of country.
Love of
I
country.
think that's very fitting.
Yeah.
Are there any stories about George Brizan that people don't know that you're able to share? Something small, something personal.
There are some, but I rather not.
Not share.
I rather not share.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I want to thank you, Mr. Boatswain, for coming in and sharing your experience of George Brizan's life with us. He'll be well remembered, I think.
I think so.
All right. Well,
thank you. All the best.
Thank you very much for coming in.